Imagine a time when a woman, in the midst of her monthly cycle of bleeding, does not slip away to wash thoroughly or change her cloth. She leaves behind the red-stained linen in a heap, simply throwing on her skirt and returning to tasks. Her teeth? No soft brush, no minty paste, perhaps only a twig chewed, or a cloth wiped across the enamel. The idea of a full-body bath is rare, perhaps reserved for a noblewoman's luxury or a public bathhouse, but even then the water is shared, seldom changed, and used by dozens before her turn. This is the world of medieval European women, where cleaning the body, the mouth, the linen, the blood-soaked rags of menstruation, these are not everyday acts of pride, but tolerated, stigmatized, compromised habits. In this world we will step, exploring the habits that would now make us squirm, but to them were everyday. Stay with me, because what follows is a panorama of the overlooked, the often humiliating, and the deeply human ways women dealt with hygiene in the Middle Ages.
The temptation of the bath, medieval women, and the scandal of cleanliness. Steam curls through the dim air of a 13th century bathhouse. A wooden tub creaks as water sloshes. The smell is sharp, warm lye, human sweat, and the faint sweetness of rosemary. Candles flicker, casting amber light on women in linen wraps, laughing softly as they pour buckets of hot water over their shoulders. For a moment, the noise of the medieval city outside disappears. Here, within the wooden walls of the public bath, medieval women reclaim a rare luxury: warmth, water, and momentary purity. Yet beyond those walls, whispers spread. Bathhouses breed sin. The rise of the communal bath. In the early and high Middle Ages, especially from the 12th to 14th centuries, bathhouses flourished across Europe. From London to Nuremberg, from Paris to Prague, they stood near rivers or town squares, marked by steam rising from wooden roofs. Bathhouses were not only for nobles, they were open to townsfolk for a small fee. Women, sometimes alone, sometimes with family, entered to wash, soak, and gossip. The architecture was simple: a large timber hall, a central hearth to heat stones, and wooden tubs filled with warm water. In wealthier towns, bathhouses were divided into separate rooms, one for men, one for women. But in many smaller places, bathing was mixed. Curtains could be drawn, but modesty was often compromised. For medieval women, whose daily lives were filled with grime, childbearing, and endless labor, the bathhouse offered rare relief, a chance to feel clean, warm, and human. Some women brought scented herbs, oils, or even rose petals to float in the water. Others rubbed their skin with rough linen cloths, scraping away the sweat and soot of days. A place of gossip and comfort. Inside, conversation flowed as freely as water. Married women complained about their husbands. Young girls exchanged secret recipes for skin oils. Widows shared stories of lost love. For a brief hour, the bathhouse became a female sanctuary. In larger cities, professional bath attendants, often women, helped customers wash, scrub, and rinse. They might offer warm drinks or small meals afterward. To a traveler or merchant, the bathhouse was both practical and pleasurable, a place to restore the body and spirit. But this comfort carried a shadow, when cleanliness became scandal. By the late Middle Ages, moralists and church leaders began to look at bathhouses with suspicion. Priests preached that mixed bathing invited sin. Chronicles accused bathhouses of being gateways to lust. The same places that once symbolized purity now carried the scent of temptation. Documents from Paris and Cologne recorded bathing companions, women who offered company, conversation, or more for a price. Not all bathhouses were brothels, but enough were that the two became entwined in public imagination. The line between cleanliness and carnality blurred. For respectable women, this meant risk. To be seen entering a bathhouse could provoke gossip. Was she there to cleanse or to sin? Even married women sometimes bathed with their husbands in private tubs, a practice the church quietly disapproved. The irony was cruel. A woman seeking simple cleanliness could be accused of indecency. A body she wished to purify was now seen as the site of temptation. The church's war on baths. The growing influence of the church in the 14th and 15th centuries reshaped hygiene culture. Monks warned that frequent bathing weakened the soul. They said the body must be mortified, not indulged. The association of water with sensual pleasure made the act suspect. As plague and disease spread through Europe, especially the Black Death, fear grew. People believed water opened the pores to infection. Bathhouses, once filled with laughter, were now labeled dangerous. The very act of washing became morally and medically risky. For women, this was devastating. The bathhouse had been one of their few public refuges, a place of warmth, sisterhood, and cleanliness. Now, its doors were closing. Bathing rituals at home. When public baths declined, home bathing became the alternative. Wealthy women had wooden tubs brought to their chambers. Servants filled them with buckets of heated water, and afterward the tub was carried away. Rose oil or vinegar was added for scent and protection. Poorer women, lacking tubs or privacy, made do with washing parts of the body in basins or near the hearth. A full bath became a luxury reserved for the sick, the noble, or the newborn. For most women, bathing now meant wiping the body with a damp cloth and praying that was enough. Still, the memory of communal baths lingered, a symbol of lost freedom. Old songs even spoke of lovers meeting where the hot water steams. The bathhouse, once pure, had become a legend tinged with scandal. Water, desire, and the female body. To understand why the bathhouse frightened moralists, one must see how the female body was imagined. In medieval medicine, a woman's body was seen as moist by nature, unstable, emotional, easily corrupted. Warm water and open skin were thought to make her even more vulnerable to desire. Thus, a woman bathing was not just a physical act, it was symbolic rebellion. She touched her own body, soothed her own flesh, sought comfort in warmth rather than penance in cold. In that sense, bathing became quietly radical. It was a moment of ownership over her body in a world that often denied her such autonomy. The decline of the bathhouse. By the 16th century, public bathhouses had all but vanished from most of Europe. Plague, puritanical fear, and the rise of private hygiene closed their doors. The once bustling hubs of water and laughter became ghostly ruins. Yet even as the baths disappeared, their memory survived in art and literature. Paintings of women bathing under candlelight, poems of lovers by warm tubs, tales of cleansing and sin. For centuries afterward, the idea of the bathing woman remained charged with both innocence and danger, a symbol of lost purity. The medieval bathhouse tells a paradoxical story. A place meant for cleansing became the symbol of moral corruption. Women who entered sought health and comfort. Society saw temptation. What began as water for the body became a mirror for human fear, the fear of touch, of desire, of female autonomy. So the next time we imagine a medieval woman dirty and unwashed, remember this. Once she did have a place to cleanse herself, a place of warmth, laughter, and shared humanity. It was the world, not her, that turned it into sin.
Childbirth, midwives, and postpartum hygiene. Blood, danger, and survival.
The air is thick with straw dust and the scent of burning herbs. A woman kneels on a rough mattress in a dim chamber, her face contorted with effort. Around her, the room is crowded with midwives, older women with calloused hands, experienced eyes, and whispered chants. Outside, the castle or village is quiet, but inside, a miracle and a peril coexist. A child is coming into the world, and the mother's life hangs in delicate balance. This was the world of medieval childbirth. For women in Europe, from Italy to England, France to Germany, the act of giving birth was not only physically exhausting, but socially, morally, and spiritually laden. Hygiene, or the lack thereof, played a crucial role in survival. The midwives and their knowledge. Midwives were the guardians of life in this world. They were women, often older and experienced, who learned their craft through apprenticeship and observation rather than formal medical education. They knew herbs that could ease labor pains, techniques to reposition a baby, and when to summon a physician for emergencies. Yet their knowledge had limits. Without understanding of germ theory or antiseptics, they did what they could, washing hands in cold water, rinsing linens, and preparing boiling water to clean instruments, but often too late or inconsistently. For wealthier women, a midwife might be accompanied by a nurse or servant, bringing clean linen, heated water, and scented oils to mask odors. For poorer women, midwives often worked with whatever was at hand: a handful of straw, a wooden bucket, a few old sheets. The room would be crowded, warm, and humid, with the smell of blood, sweat, and herbs, mingling in ways that modern noses would find overwhelming. Blood, linen, and hygiene. The sight of blood was constant. Labor brought copious amounts, and postpartum bleeding continued for days or weeks. Linen shifts and strips of cloth soaked it up, but washing was sporadic. Cold river water or boiling ashes could be used, but frequently the same cloth would be reused multiple times. The smell, warmth, and dampness created conditions ripe for infection. Puerperal fever, postpartum infection, was common and deadly. Historians estimate that in some regions, up to 1 in 5 women died from childbirth-related infections. Without antiseptics or antibiotics, midwives' skill, vigilance, and prayers were the only defenses. Cleaning the mother's body, changing the linen, and moving her to a fresh mattress were critical acts of care, yet they were often done under conditions that modern viewers would find appalling: shared bedding, reused rags, and little understanding of bacterial contamination. Rituals and beliefs. Religion and superstition intertwined with hygiene. Some midwives sprinkled holy water or recited prayers to protect mother and child. Baths before or after labor were rare. Some physicians and clergy warned that warm baths weakened the body or invited disease. Blood was sometimes seen as both life-giving and dangerous, a conduit of spiritual impurity if not properly managed. Even after childbirth, women faced social and ritualistic hygiene practices. Certain cultures prescribed purification rituals, requiring the mother to cleanse herself in water or herbal solutions. The church often dictated when a woman could return to the public or religious life, intertwining morality with bodily cleanliness. Class divisions in childbirth. Wealth dictated hygiene. Noble women gave birth in private chambers with multiple attendants, heated water, and fresh linens, while poor women labored in communal or cramped spaces. Noble women could afford fragrant herbs to mask odors. Clean sheets changed frequently, and sometimes even scented oils or pomanders to ease discomfort. Poor women had little beyond straw mats and water. often leading to heightened risk of infection and extreme discomfort. Despite these differences, all women faced the universal dangers of childbirth: hemorrhage, infection, difficult labor, and sometimes the loss of their child. Hygiene practices, however crude by modern standards, were an essential component of survival. Midwives' attention to washing hands, rinsing linen, and preparing the birthing space often meant the difference between life and death. Postpartum care. After delivery, women remained largely immobile. They were tended by midwives or family members, receiving warm broths, herbal remedies, and occasional baths if circumstances allowed. Linen was changed when possible, and the mother's body was gently cleaned, but she remained vulnerable to infection and exhaustion. Many women labored for weeks, dependent on others for their basic hygiene, illustrating the reliance on community and skill in a time before modern medicine. The newborn also faced hygiene challenges. Midwives cleaned the infant with boiled water or herbal infusions, wrapped the baby in linen, and sometimes applied oils to the skin. The concept of sterilized instruments or antiseptic care was unknown, but care, attentiveness, and repeated washing of linens were their best defense. Endurance, risk, and resilience. Medieval childbirth and postpartum hygiene reveal the resilience of women in a harsh world. Despite the danger, the smell of blood, and the primitive conditions, women bore children and survived, often repeatedly. Their hygiene habits, patching together clean linen, pouring hot water over their own bodies, scrubbing sheets, and trusting in midwives' knowledge, were both acts of survival and assertions of agency within a society that offered few choices. Hygiene in childbirth was inseparable from life and death. The blood-soaked rags, the smells of herbs and sweat, the repetitive washing of linens, and the limited baths, these were not signs of neglect, but the reality of survival. Modern readers may recoil, but understanding the context illuminates the courage, patience, and skill of medieval women. Conclusion. Childbirth in the Middle Ages was a trial by fire, sweat, and blood. Midwives and family members worked tirelessly to manage hygiene with the tools available, fighting against infection, moral expectation, and the limits of their knowledge. Linen, water, herbs, and attention were their weapons. For medieval women, survival depended on their endurance and the careful management of the dirty, bloody, and dangerous reality of labor. These stories remind us that hygiene is not only about cleanliness, but about life itself, and that the courage of women across centuries was measured not in comfort, but in the ability to face danger, disease, and blood, and still bring new life into the world.
Secrets of the body, medieval women, sexuality, and the struggle for hygiene. The faint scent of herbs clings to the air, mingling with the smoke of cooking fires and the lingering musk of laboring bodies. In the shadows of a narrow chamber, a woman adjusts her shift, discreetly rubbing a cloth over her skin. She is aware of every gaze, every whisper outside the room. For medieval women, bodily hygiene was not merely a matter of comfort. It was a constant negotiation with society, sexuality, and the hidden taboos of daily life. The private life of hygiene. Unlike today, medieval women did not have private bathrooms or running water. Bathing was infrequent. Washing the body required hauling water, heating it, and creating privacy in spaces designed for survival rather than comfort. Even within the home, women often washed only their hands, face, and feet, leaving other parts of the body untouched. The areas deemed less visible or more intimate, the groin, underarms, and sometimes hair, were often neglected.
These were not just practical decisions, they were shaped by the fear of moral scrutiny. To touch, clean, or display one's own body could be fraught with judgment. Women learned early that overexposure invited suspicion, gossip, or even moral condemnation. Sexuality and social pressure. Medieval society closely tied women's bodies to morality. Every drop of sweat, every scent, every visible stain of blood could become a marker of virtue or vice. During menstruation, women were considered impure in many regions. Sexual contact, cooking, or attending church was restricted. Perfumed oils, scented herbs, and layered shifts were used not only to conceal odors, but to maintain social respectability. Even outside menstruation, women navigated a delicate balance. Intimacy with a husband demanded some attention to cleanliness, but overzealous washing or display of bodily awareness could be read as vanity, or worse, promiscuity. The tension between natural bodily functions and social expectations created an invisible burden. The body had to be managed carefully, secretly, and continuously. Smells as social currency. Odor in medieval Europe was a moral and social signal. Sweet scents suggested refinement and virtue. Sour, sweat, or hearth-stung musk marked labor, poverty, or moral laxity. Noble women used perfumed oils, rosewater, and pomanders to mask natural odors. Poorer women relied on fresh air, herbs, or scraping linen over skin to remove sweat and grime. The very act of masking odor was a social necessity. A woman entering a noble household with strong scent of smoke or unwashed hair risked insult or derision. In marketplaces or communal spaces, scents marked boundaries of class, labor, and morality. The body and taboo. Certain bodily fluids carried additional stigma. Vaginal discharge, perspiration, or traces of sexual activity were loaded with moral and social meaning. Women learned to hide, wipe, or layer garments to obscure these signs. Clean linen was a shield against judgment. A fresh shift could signify virtue and diligence, while stained or smelly fabric could imply neglect or impropriety. Midwives and elder women often instructed young women in discreet cleaning practices, rubbing with damp cloths, using herbs to reduce odors, and changing shifts regularly. Knowledge of the body was passed quietly, not publicly. Awareness of what to clean, when, and how was a skill as essential as needlework or cooking. Class distinctions in private hygiene. The disparity between rich and poor women was striking. Noble women could afford multiple layers of linen, perfumed oils, scented waters, and sometimes private bathing spaces. Their bodies could be concealed, scented, and managed to a higher degree of social acceptability. Peasant women, however, faced harsh realities. A single linen shift, shared water, and labor-intensive days meant that masking odor and maintaining hygiene required creativity and endurance. Herbs plucked from the garden, river water, or damp cloths were their tools. They learned to balance necessity with discretion, survival with respectability. Hand, mouth, and foot care. Even small acts, washing hands before meals, wiping the face, combing hair were meaningful. Hands revealed labor and social status. Teeth might be rubbed with cloth or twigs, and hair combed to remove lice or dust. Feet, often neglected, carried the day's work and grime. Clean hands and face could signal virtue even if the rest of the body was less attended. Yet these small acts were also acts of control over one's appearance, over one's reputation, and over one's own body in a world that demanded obedience and discretion. Each ritual of washing, rubbing, or scenting was a negotiation between natural function and societal expectation. Secrecy and survival. Medieval women lived in a constant interplay between private hygiene and public judgment. The body, with its odors, fluids, and vulnerabilities, had to be managed in secret. Perfume, herbs, layered clothing, and discreet washing allowed women to participate in society while guarding their dignity. Sexuality and hygiene were inseparable. A woman's cleanliness could imply readiness for marriage, fidelity to her husband, or moral virtue. Neglect could invite rumor, judgment, or punishment. Daily struggles with sweat, blood, and bodily odor were not simply physical, they were psychological and social survival strategies. Conclusion. The private hygiene of medieval women was an art of negotiation between nature and society, body and morality, necessity and reputation. Sweating, menstruating, laboring, or simply existing in a world without running water required ingenuity, patience, and resilience. Through herbs, linen, perfumed oils, and careful rituals, women carved out spaces of dignity and control. Their struggles were private, often invisible, but they reveal the profound ways in which medieval women managed sexuality, taboo, and hygiene. Blood, silence, and resilience. Medieval women and their monthly cycle. The room is dimly lit, the smell of herbs and damp linen heavy in the air. A young woman sits on a straw mat, quietly adjusting the folds of her shift. Outside, the village hums with activity. Children running, animals calling, and merchants shouting. But inside, she faces a ritual of solitude and endurance. For medieval women, menstruation was more than a biological event. It was a time of secrecy, strategy, and survival. The reality of menstrual life. Periods arrived without warning, often bringing discomfort, cramps, and weakness. Daily life did not pause. Women continued to cook, clean, care for children, and tend livestock. Yet the cycle imposed a rhythm on their bodies. Hours of rest, careful planning, and discreet movement to manage bleeding and fatigue. Menstrual hygiene was a constant challenge. Clean water was scarce, and private bathing spaces even scarcer. Women often relied on partial washing, rubbing the body with damp cloths, washing hands and underarms, and occasionally bathing in a bucket of warm water. Herbs such as lavender, rosemary, or sage were infused to reduce odor, soothe skin, and provide a sense of freshness in a time before modern sanitation. Absorbent materials and protection. To absorb menstrual blood, women improvised with linen strips, soft cotton, or folded rags. Some added layers of moss or wool for extra protection. These materials were washed, boiled, and dried when possible. But during heavy flow, the task was unending. Noble women had the advantage of fresh linen, maids to assist with washing, and private spaces to manage their cycles. Peasant women, however, had to use what was available, often layering rags, drying them in the sun, and hiding them carefully to prevent exposure and embarrassment. Managing odor and stains. Smell was inevitable, but women developed strategies to conceal it. Strong-smelling herbs were placed in linen, shifts were layered, and clothing was frequently changed when possible. Odor was a social concern as much as a personal one. Being noticed could lead to gossip, judgment, or shame. Maintaining discretion was essential. Stains on shifts or undergarments were managed with ingenuity. Rubbing with cold water, sprinkling ashes or herbal powders, or carefully layering fabrics to hide marks. Every adjustment was deliberate,
aiming to balance hygiene, comfort, and privacy. Coping with pain and fatigue. Menstruation was accompanied by cramps, back pain, and sometimes severe weakness. Women adapted by taking breaks from heavy labor, sitting or lying on straw mats, and leaning on family members or servants for support. In some cases, herbal remedies such as chamomile, rosemary, or parsley were brewed to ease pain. Despite discomfort, life continued. Tending animals, cooking meals, or performing household chores could not stop. Social secrecy and religious norms. Menstruation carried social and religious taboos. In some regions, women were considered impure during their periods, barred from church, certain foods, or ritual activities. These beliefs reinforced secrecy. Women often navigated their cycles silently, careful not to reveal blood, odor, or discomfort to others. Communal knowledge was shared discreetly. Mothers, elder women, and midwives instructed young girls in techniques of absorbency, odor control, and discreet washing. Knowledge was whispered and taught through observation, making menstrual management a shared, if hidden, aspect of female life. Class and menstrual management. The contrast between wealth and poverty was stark. Noble women had private chambers, fresh linen, and servants to assist. They could bathe more frequently, change layers, and use herbs or perfumed waters to stay comfortable. Peasant women managed with limited resources: cold water washes, reused rags, and careful positioning to prevent exposure. But in both cases, ingenuity, patience, and endurance were the keys to navigating monthly life. Survival, endurance, and daily life. Menstrual cycles were an invisible trial. Women developed routines of cleanliness, odor control, and pain management, integrating them into the rhythm of everyday work. Even in primitive conditions, they exercised control over their bodies, washing discreetly, changing cloths, managing discomfort, and maintaining social decorum. This was survival on multiple levels. It was physical, managing blood, odor, and fatigue. It was social, avoiding gossip and maintaining respectability. And it was psychological, coping with the isolation, discomfort, and relentless repetition of monthly cycles. Conclusion. Menstruation in the Middle Ages was not merely a biological fact. It was a daily, secretive struggle against discomfort, social scrutiny, and scarcity. Women faced pain, odor, and limited hygiene options with ingenuity and resilience. Absorbent cloths, herbs, partial bathing, and strategic rest were tools of survival. In every discreet adjustment of a shift, every herbal rinse, and every careful washing of rags, the medieval woman demonstrated courage, endurance, and mastery of her body under extreme conditions. Menstruation may have been a private ordeal, but it was a vivid testament to the strength, resourcefulness, and resilience of women navigating a world that offered them little comfort or privacy.
Disease, fear, and the slow transformation of hygiene. The streets of medieval towns were narrow, crowded, and reeking of life. Livestock, humans, and waste intertwined in a pungent symphony. The stench of open drains, unwashed bodies, and rotting food was ever present. Inside homes, women worked tirelessly to maintain hygiene, bathing, washing clothes, preparing meals, but the sheer density of the population and scarcity of clean water made their efforts feel Sisyphean. Hygiene in decline. By the late Middle Ages, bathing and cleanliness had begun to decline in urban centers. Bathhouses, once popular gathering spots, faced closures due to religious admonitions, moral panic, and fear of disease transmission. Women who had relied on communal baths found themselves confined to cramped homes, managing their bodies with less water, less heat, and fewer resources. The decline was not uniform. Rural women,
though isolated, often maintained traditional practices using rivers, rainwater, and herbal infusions. Urban women, however, faced the twin threats of overcrowding and disease, with hygiene practices increasingly restricted to sporadic washing, linen changes, and the use of scented oils to mask odors. The shadow of disease. The specter of disease loomed large. The Black Death, recurring plagues, and other epidemics terrified populations. People believed foul smells, miasmas, and unwashed bodies spread sickness. Ironically, this fear sometimes discouraged bathing. Priests and physicians warned against hot baths that opened the pores and might invite illness. Puerperal fever, scarlet fever, and dysentery were common killers. Women's bodies, already burdened by labor, menstruation, and childcare, were vulnerable. Hygiene became a strategic, sometimes desperate act. Washing hands, cleaning surfaces, boiling water, and managing laundry were not comforts, but shields against a hostile world. Social fear and moral judgment. Beyond disease, the social gaze shaped hygiene. Strong odors, unwashed hair, and visible grime could lead to suspicion, ridicule, or moral judgment. Women navigated the thin line between cleanliness and acceptability, knowing that every smell could signal poverty, impurity, or negligence. The interplay of fear and morality transformed hygiene into an act laden with social and psychological significance. Bathhouses and private baths. Public bathhouses declined under religious scrutiny, seen as sites of sin, lust, or disease. Private baths became markers of wealth and status. Noble women could access heated rooms, tubs, scented waters, and attendants, maintaining hygiene more consistently. Peasant women adapted with ingenuity. Partial washes, herbal rinses, and careful linen management became their lifelines. Despite limitations, these efforts represented continuity. Medieval women persisted in managing bodies, odors, and clothing, adapting traditions to survive in increasingly restrictive and disease-ridden environments. The dawn of early modern practices. Amid fear and decline, seeds of change emerged. New practices, use of oils, scented powders, salt rubs, and more systematic linen washing laid foundations for early modern hygiene. Physicians began advocating hand washing, herbal washes, and periodic bathing, blending observation with superstition. Women, ever resourceful, incorporated these lessons into their daily routines. Wealthy households led the way, adopting perfumed water, heated bathing, and more frequent clothing changes. Peasant women, constrained by scarcity, continued to rely on rivers, herbs, and creativity. Across classes, the recognition that hygiene could protect health became more widely understood, even if full knowledge of germs was centuries away. Resilience in the face of adversity. The decline of hygiene in late medieval society did not erase the ingenuity of women. They adapted, improvised, and persisted, keeping families fed, bodies reasonably clean, and social appearances intact. Each wash, linen change, and herbal rinse was an act of defiance against disease, scarcity, and societal expectation. Women balanced fear, labor, and social norms with remarkable resilience. The faint fragrance of herbs, the careful folding of linen, and the scrubbing of hands were acts of courage, knowledge, and endurance. Medieval hygiene may have been imperfect, but it was the product of lived experience, resourcefulness, and survival instinct. Conclusion. By the end of the medieval period, hygiene was at a crossroads.
Disease and fear challenged traditional practices. Social norms restricted communal bathing, and scarcity tested ingenuity. Yet women continued to navigate this treacherous landscape with intelligence, patience, and resilience. The gradual shift towards early modern practices, more systematic washing, use of oils and scents, linen management, was rooted in the lessons of medieval women's daily struggles. Their labor, rituals, and improvisations bridged the gap between fear and survival, tradition and innovation, and filth and emerging cleanliness. In the struggle against disease, odor, and social judgment, medieval women displayed a quiet heroism. Their hands scrubbed, their linen changed, and their bodies bathed in the faint hope of protection. In these acts, we see not just hygiene, but endurance, creativity, and the relentless pursuit of dignity in a world shaped by fear, scarcity, and uncertainty.
Hidden taboos and disgusting secrets. The unseen hygiene of medieval women. The air in a medieval cottage is thick with heat, smoke, and the faint odor of laboring bodies. A young woman shifts nervously, adjusting the folds of her linen shift, feeling the uncomfortable wetness against her skin. Few will see, fewer will understand, and none will speak of it. For medieval women, the most intimate and taboo parts of the body, sweat, secret discharges, menstrual blood, and even milk from nursing, were sources of shame, discomfort, and ingenuity. The reality of bodily secretions. A woman's body produced what society deemed invisible or disgusting substances: sweat clinging to skin, menstrual blood staining shifts, vaginal discharge, milk leaking from breasts, and the faint odor of urine from long days of labor. These were natural processes, yet they carried enormous social weight. Labor, cooking, and travel exacerbated the accumulation of bodily fluids. Sweat dripped down backs, pooled under arms, and clung to skirts. Breastfeeding mothers faced constant leakage, staining shifts and rags. Menstrual blood required careful layering of linen to absorb and conceal. Even the faintest odor could invite whispers, suspicion, or social judgment. Concealment and survival. Women became masters of concealment. Linen shifts were layered multiple times. Herbs, oils, and even vinegar-scented cloths were pressed against underarms, laps, or breasts to mask smell. Cloths were changed, washed, and boiled when possible, but scarcity made perfection impossible. The work was endless. A woman would scrub, dab, and fold, walking through her day aware of every drop, every scent, and every potential exposure. Bathing remained infrequent. Water scarcity, labor demands, and social norms made daily cleansing unrealistic. What the body emitted had to be managed in secrecy, ingenuity, and constant vigilance. Open wounds, skin infections, and dirt. The hardships of daily life meant that women often carried more than just sweat and fluids. Cuts, sores, rashes, and boils were common. Dirt and ashes from cooking or field work collected in cracks of skin, under fingernails, or along the scalp. These minor injuries, left untreated or partially treated, could become infected. Herbs were applied to reduce odor and prevent worsening infection. Oils, ash, and compresses were layered over wounds. Noble women might have attendants to help, but most women relied on home remedies and improvisation. Every layer, every dab, every fold was a delicate balance between hygiene, survival, and concealment. The role of perfume and herbs. Scent was both a shield and a social tool. Lavender, rosemary, mint, and other herbs were placed inside shifts,
rubbed into skin or infused in small cloth pouches. Oils coated hair, armpits, and folds of skin. Even the poorest women scavenged herbs to mask odors. Smell was a language, a way to communicate cleanliness, virtue, and respectability, even when the body betrayed hours of labor, sweat, and secret fluids. Class divide in secret hygiene. The disparity between rich and poor was stark. Noble women had servants to scrub shifts, layer linen, and apply perfumes or scented oils to breasts, armpits, and hair. Their bodies could be made socially acceptable despite the natural secretions. Peasant women relied on resourcefulness. Ash, herbs, reused cloths, and sunlight for drying were essential. Improvisation was survival. Secret rituals, changing rags multiple times a day, scrubbing with cold water, or layering shifts allowed them to function in society without humiliation. Social implications. The management of bodily fluids was not just personal hygiene, it was social armor. Odor or visible stains could trigger gossip, shame, or judgment. Women learned to walk, sit, and interact carefully, guarding every part of the body that might reveal their natural processes. Mothers taught daughters, midwives advised patients, and elder women passed down techniques in whispers. Knowledge of managing secret discharges was essential for survival in a world where even a trace of smell could alter reputation. Endurance, ingenuity, and hidden heroism. These hidden struggles reveal the extraordinary resilience of medieval women. Daily life was an intricate negotiation with their own bodies, the materials available, and the scrutiny of society. Every dab of cloth, every fold of linen, every herbal sachet, and every careful wash was an act of ingenuity and courage. Despite labor, poverty, disease, and social judgment, women maintained hygiene within impossible constraints. They managed sweat, blood, milk, and odor with skill and patience, navigating one of the most intimate and taboo aspects of life. Their bodies, though judged, were controlled with remarkable ingenuity, turning shame and disgust into survival. Conclusion. Medieval women lived in constant negotiation with the most intimate and taboo aspects of their bodies. Sweat, secret discharges, milk, and sores were managed through ingenuity, herbs, linen, and sheer endurance. This hidden hygiene, disgusting to the untrained eye, was a testament to resilience, courage, and mastery over a world that offered few comforts. Every layer of cloth, every herbal dab, and every discreet wash was a silent story of survival. In the shadows of their homes and chambers, medieval women transformed daily struggle into quiet heroism, ensuring that life, dignity, and social respect endured despite the disgusting, inevitable realities of their bodies.
The sweat of survival. How medieval work shaped women's bodies. The sun rises over a medieval village, but it is already high in the sky, beating down on women bent over fields, hearths, and washing stones. Every motion, from stirring the cauldron to hauling water, from grinding grain to tending animals, drains strength and produces sweat. The smell clings to skin, seeps into clothing, and fills homes with the earthy, pungent odor of labor. The reality of daily labor. Medieval women's lives were defined by work. Dawn to dusk, they cooked, cleaned, washed, tended children, gardened, carried water, milked cows, spun yarn, and preserved food. Each task was physically demanding, leaving sweat glistening on the skin and seeping into the folds of heavy linen or woolen dresses.
Long hours in the sun, over open fires, or in cold streams compounded the effect. Sweat mingled with dust, ashes, animal oils, and the faint remnants of meals, creating a scent that was inescapable. Even noble women, confined to chambers, were not exempt. Attending to hot stoves, heavy laundry, and layered garments produced its own invisible labor odor. Clothing and odor. The typical medieval woman wore multiple layers, shifts of linen, dresses of wool, aprons and cloaks. Heavy, rough fabrics trapped sweat and dust against the skin. The folds of clothing became small microenvironments where odors mingled and persisted. Layering linen helped absorb sweat, but it could never completely remove the smell. Women learned to manage it with herbs tucked into shifts, scented oils dabbed on necks and wrists, and frequent airing of garments in sunlight. Every layer of cloth was a barrier and a tool, a way to navigate the constant presence of body odor in public and private life. Concealment and ingenuity. Managing sweat and odor was both practical and social. Women became masters of concealment, folding linen to absorb moisture, rubbing herbs into armpits and neck, drying garments in sun or smoke, and carefully adjusting attire to minimize exposure. Breastfeeding mothers had the added challenge of milk soaking shifts. Sweat and milk combined to create heavier, more pungent odors. Women used extra layers, herbs, and careful folding to manage these challenges discreetly. Class differences in managing sweat. The disparity between social classes shaped experience. Noble women could call upon servants to wash clothing, reapply scented oils, and scrub skin, masking the labor-induced odors that could betray them. Peasant women, however, improvised. Cold water rinses, layered rags, ash, and herbs became essential tools for survival. Resourcefulness was not optional, it was life itself. Even minor gestures, wiping hands on linen, pressing a damp cloth against the forehead, or using herbs in the hair, were deliberate acts to preserve dignity, comfort, and social respect. Health, fatigue, and odor. Sweat was more than a smell. It signaled exertion, fatigue, and vulnerability. Skin irritation, rashes, or sores were common due to trapped moisture, friction from rough fabrics, and prolonged labor. Women learned to manage discomfort with herbs, oils, and careful washing of visible skin. Odor, while unavoidable, was socially managed. It could not fully disappear, but careful layering, perfumed cloths, and selective washing allowed women to maintain acceptable social appearances. The daily battle against sweat and smell was continuous, an invisible but persistent labor alongside visible work. Social consequences. Odor carried social weight. Strong or noticeable body scent could lead to gossip, ridicule, or moral judgment. Women moved carefully through spaces, aware that every gesture, bend, or reach could betray hours of labor and accumulated sweat. Hygiene was as much about survival and social navigation as it was about health. Endurance and resilience. Through it all, medieval women demonstrated extraordinary resilience. They balanced labor, social expectations, and bodily reality with ingenuity and patience. Sweat, dirt, and odor were part of life, yet women found ways to manage and survive within these constraints. Each fold of linen, dab of herb, and careful rinse was an act of quiet heroism. Every hour bent over a cauldron, field, or washing stone was both physical toil and strategic hygiene management. Women endured, adapted, and controlled their bodies as best they could, asserting dignity despite the constant presence of labor-induced odors. Conclusion. Sweat, labor, and odor were inseparable from medieval women's lives. The daily grind left visible marks on the body and invisible scents in the air. Women became masters of concealment and endurance, using linen, herbs, oils, and ingenuity to navigate a world where hard work inevitably betrayed itself through smell. The sweat of daily labor tells a story not only of toil, but of resilience, resourcefulness, and courage. Medieval women endured physical strain, social scrutiny, and the inescapable presence of body odor with skill and patience, proving that hygiene was never merely cosmetic. It was a continuous, vital struggle for dignity, survival, and social acceptance.
Marriage, superstitions, and bodily taboos. The hidden lives of medieval women. A wedding procession winds through a medieval village, banners fluttering, musicians playing, and neighbors watching with anticipation. But behind the grand celebration lies a hidden world, the private life of a woman bound by marriage, societal expectation, and superstition. For medieval women, the rituals of marriage were not only about union, but also an initiation into a new, often secretive and taboo-bound understanding of the body. The pressure of marriage. Marriage imposed immediate and relentless pressure on women. They were expected to be modest yet attractive, obedient yet clever, productive yet discreet. Their bodies became both instruments and symbols. Beauty, cleanliness, and scent were scrutinized, and failures, visible stains, body odor, or illness could damage reputation or social standing. Brides often spent days preparing for their new life, bathing in heated water when available, perfuming hair and linen, and layering clothing to conceal sweat, menstrual blood, or other natural secretions. Even in the grandest households, attendants guided every movement, every dab of oil, every braid and fold, turning hygiene into a performance of virtue and decorum. Bodily odor and sexuality. Marriage intensified the social attention to bodily secretions. Menstrual blood, sweat, vaginal discharge, and postnatal fluids became subjects of superstition and caution. Some communities believed that the scent of a woman could affect fertility, morality, or marital harmony. Women learned to manage these natural odors with herbs, oils, linen layering, and careful bathing. For poorer women, improvisation was essential. Linen rags, sun-dried cloths, herbal sachets, and careful positioning became critical strategies. Even in intimate encounters were conducted with awareness of the body's natural emissions, balancing necessity, modesty, and social expectation. Superstitions and taboos. Medieval superstition governed almost every aspect of a woman's marital hygiene. Menstrual blood was thought to harm crops, animals, or even men's health if exposed improperly. Certain herbs were believed to prevent evil or unclean influences. Pregnancy, childbirth, and postnatal care were surrounded by ritualistic precautions, combining health, magic, and moral expectation. Women were expected to conceal their bodies, regulate odors, and follow prescribed routines to prevent social or supernatural consequences. Failure to adhere to these norms could invite gossip, suspicion, or moral judgment, reinforcing the weight of secrecy around bodily functions. Privacy, secrecy, and home life. The bedroom became a stage of private hygiene management. Women adjusted layers of linen, applied scented oils, and managed secret discharges with discretion. Even minor lapses could reveal the hidden labor of maintaining cleanliness, exposing them to embarrassment or social censure. In households without attendants, these practices required extraordinary patience and resourcefulness.
Improvised washes, sun-dried cloths, and herbal infusions became the instruments of control over bodies that were constantly producing odors, sweat, and secretions. Class divisions in marital hygiene. Noblewomen had the advantage of attendants, perfumed oils, heated bathing chambers, and abundant linen. Their bodies could be maintained as socially acceptable, masking the natural processes of menstruation, sweat, and childbirth. Peasant women faced scarcity, yet they adapted with cleverness, layering rags, applying herbs, and utilizing sun and smoke for cleansing and drying. Their ingenuity allowed them to navigate the same expectations with fewer resources, demonstrating resilience and subtle mastery over bodily realities. Social and moral consequences. Marriage amplified the scrutiny on women's bodies. Odor, stains, or perceived uncleanliness could lead to judgment, ostracization, or accusations of immorality. The combination of labor, childbirth, and natural bodily emissions placed women in a continuous negotiation: manage the body, maintain modesty, and navigate superstition. The rituals surrounding menstruation, postnatal recovery, and sexual hygiene were deeply intertwined with morality and superstition, making hygiene not just a matter of health, but of social survival. Endurance and ingenuity. Despite social pressures, physical labor, and biological realities, women endured and adapted. Every dab of cloth, every herbal sachet, every careful fold of linen was an act of ingenuity and silent heroism. The ability to manage natural secretions, odors, and skin conditions while maintaining social grace was a mark of strength and resourcefulness. Marriage, with all its pomp and superstition, exposed the hidden labors of women's bodies. Behind every smile, every neat braid, and every clean linen layer was a meticulous, often exhausting effort to navigate a world of taboos, odors, and social expectation.
Fear, magic, and cleansing. How beliefs shaped medieval women's hygiene. In a shadowed medieval cottage, a woman dips her hands into a bucket of warm water, rubbing her arms carefully while whispering a prayer. Outside, the village stirs, voices, animals, and the distant toll of a church bell. But inside, fear is a constant companion. Fear of illness, fear of sin, fear of witchcraft. For medieval women, daily hygiene was inseparable from superstition, medical belief, and the persistent fear that a mismanaged body could invite misfortune. Medical beliefs and bodily odor. Physicians and midwives of the Middle Ages taught that foul smells, sweat, and secretions could be signs of imbalance in the humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. A strong body odor was not just socially embarrassing, it was a potential symptom of illness or moral failing. Women learned early to manage these signs with careful washing, herbal rinses, and linen changes. Sweat was considered especially dangerous. If it lingered on the skin, it could carry disease, weaken the body, or allow evil humors to infiltrate. This belief made regular washing, even when inconvenient, a necessity. Oils, herbs, and scented water were applied not merely for fragrance, but as protective measures against illness. Witchcraft, magic, and female bodies. Witchcraft fears intertwined with hygiene. Women were warned that unclean bodies, menstrual blood, or foul odors could attract spirits, curses, or misfortune. Stories abounded. A woman who neglected her bath could be blamed for a neighbor's sick cow, a child's fever, or failed crops. These beliefs transformed everyday hygiene into a ritualistic act. Bathing, rubbing herbs on skin, and changing linen were both practical and magical, defending the body from disease, sin, and supernatural harm. Every fold of linen, every dab of herb, and every rinse of water was an act of vigilance. Social suspicion and the fear of gossip. Odor, dirt, and secret discharges were not merely biological realities, they were social markers. Villagers watched, whispered, and judged. A woman who smelled strongly or had visible stains risked gossip, moral accusation, or even suspicion of witchcraft. The stakes were high. Personal hygiene became a shield against social and supernatural scrutiny. Class differences in coping with fear. Noble women had a tendency to scrub, rinse, and perfume their bodies. Heated water, scented oils, and abundant linen allowed them to maintain social and magical protection. For the poor, improvisation was key. Cold water, sun-dried rags, and herbs like rosemary or lavender became tools of defense. Even without wealth, women developed rituals to guard themselves, their families, and their reputations. Every scrub, every linen change, every herb rubbed into armpits or hair was a carefully executed measure against multiple threats: disease, gossip, and supernatural punishment. Daily rituals under fear. Morning, afternoon, and evening, medieval women engaged in cycles of cleaning. They washed hands before meals, wiped faces and underarms, changed shifts and aprons, and sprinkled herbs in hair or linen. Even during menstruation, herbs and layered linen were essential to avoid detection, shame, and imagined curses. Baths were rare but powerful. When water was heated and poured over the body, women recited prayers or applied protective herbs. The ritual blended physical cleansing with spiritual, magical, and social protection. Cleanliness was safety, decorum, and defense, all at once. Hygiene as resistance. Despite superstition and fear, these rituals represent remarkable ingenuity. Women mastered their bodies, using limited resources to maintain health, social standing, and spiritual protection. Sweat, odor, secretions, and dirt were managed creatively. Herbs, linen, oils, and careful movement turned impossible conditions into survival strategies. Even in the poorest cottages, women adapted knowledge from mothers, midwives, and elders, creating a tapestry of hygiene rituals that merged practical, social, and magical purposes. Their labor, foresight, and vigilance were a quiet defiance of disease, gossip, and superstition. Cleanliness was never simple. It was a battlefield. Sweat, odor, secret discharges, and superstition all demanding mastery. And in that mastery, medieval women proved themselves to be inventive, resourceful, and endlessly courageous, surviving and thriving in the face of the most relentless pressures of body and society.
The public eye, bathhouses, streets, and the fear of exposure. The narrow, cobbled streets of a medieval village echo with footsteps, animals, and merchants calling their wares. Women move carefully through this bustling public stage, each step deliberate, each fold of linen adjusted. Outside their homes, the social gaze is relentless. Every scent, stain, or visible secret could spark gossip, suspicion, or shame. Public spaces were both necessity and danger, and navigating them required vigilance, ingenuity, and courage. Bathhouses: pleasure, risk, and hygiene. Communal bathhouses once thrived as centers of cleanliness, socialization, and relaxation. Women gathered to wash, share news, and exchange advice on herbs, linen, and hygiene practices. But bathhouses were not purely practical. They were morally charged spaces. Church authorities and social critics claimed they encouraged lust, sin, or the spread of disease. By the late Middle Ages, many bathhouses faced closure. Women lost spaces where they could manage their bodies with some privacy.
learning instead to maintain hygiene within cramped homes or riverside washing areas. This loss transformed daily cleaning into an act fraught with social and moral tension. The fear of exposure. Exposure in public was a constant worry. Sweat, menstrual blood, or the faint odor of secret discharges could betray hours of labor, menstruation, or breastfeeding. Women walked carefully, layered linen strategically, and carried herbs in shifts or handkerchiefs to mask odor. Every movement was calculated. A sudden breeze, a hurried gesture, or an awkward seating could reveal what was meant to remain invisible. In this environment, social survival depended on mastery over one's body, scent, and appearance. Linen, herbs, and oils as shields. Layered shifts and aprons absorbed sweat and secret discharges, while herbs tucked into collars, sleeves, or underarms concealed odor. Oils were applied to hair and skin, creating a faint, socially acceptable fragrance. These measures were not vanity. They were defensive strategies, protecting women from gossip, moral judgment, and superstition. Even in the poorest households, women became experts in concealment. Linen strips, sun-dried cloths, and carefully layered garments allowed them to participate in public life without shame, maintaining dignity under the scrutiny of neighbors, church officials, and potential suitors. Rivers, communal washing, and public hygiene. For peasant women, rivers and communal washing spots served as substitutes for private baths. Washing clothes, cleaning the body, and rinsing linen became public rituals of hygiene, performed under the gaze of the community. Awareness of odor, modesty, and stains shaped every movement. Women learned to use water, herbs, and cloths creatively. A quick rinse, careful folding, and strategic drying minimized exposure while ensuring cleanliness. Even in public, ingenuity allowed women to negotiate the tension between necessity and discretion. Class differences in public hygiene. Noble women had the advantage of attendants and private bathing chambers. Heated water, perfumed oils, and abundant linen ensured that public appearances remained flawless. Every gesture, every scent, every layer of linen was orchestrated for social acceptability. For the poor, survival in public spaces required improvisation and acute awareness. Odor, stains, and sweat had to be managed with whatever resources were available. Herbs, ash, layered linen, and careful movement became essential tools for negotiating public life. Social judgment and superstition. Public spaces were arenas of moral and social scrutiny. Women who smelled strongly, had visible stains, or displayed signs of fatigue were at risk of gossip, suspicion, or even accusations of witchcraft. Social judgment was relentless, linking hygiene to virtue, morality, and respectability. Fear shaped behavior. Every step, every gesture, every layer of linen carried the weight of social expectation. Women mastered their bodies and their movements, transforming mundane acts of hygiene into sophisticated strategies for survival. Endurance, ingenuity, and visibility. Navigating public life demanded resilience. Sweat, odor, menstrual blood, and secret discharges were managed with skill, patience, and discretion. Women learned to anticipate exposure, mask natural scents, and maintain dignity in the face of judgment. The public gaze was both a challenge and a motivator. By mastering concealment, using herbs and linen creatively, and observing the subtleties of social expectation, women transformed vulnerability into control. Public hygiene became an intricate performance of survival, resourcefulness, and courage. Conclusion. Public spaces in the Middle Ages were battlegrounds for women's hygiene, privacy, and social survival. Bathhouses, rivers, streets, and markets demanded constant vigilance, strategic concealment, and ingenuity. Layered linen, herbal satchels, scented oils, and careful movement were not mere habits. They were shields against exposure, gossip, disease, and superstition. In mastering public hygiene, medieval women displayed extraordinary resilience, intelligence, and courage. They navigated a world where the simplest act of bathing or walking could become a test of dignity, discretion, and social survival, proving that hygiene was inseparable from both survival and social mastery.
Poverty, filth, and survival, the hidden realities of lower-class women. In the narrow alleys of medieval towns, the air is thick with smoke, the stench of unwashed bodies, and the odor of livestock and rotting waste. Here, lower-class women struggle daily, balancing labor, scarcity, and survival. Their lives are shaped not by luxury, but by necessity, and their hygiene is an ongoing battle against filth, disease, and social stigma. Daily life in poverty. From dawn to dusk, peasant women toil. They fetch water from distant wells, grind grain, tend livestock, cook meals over open fires, wash clothing by hand, and care for children. Every movement generates sweat and dirt, which mingle with ashes from cooking, mud from the fields, and dust from the roads. Bathing is rare. Water is scarce and often cold. Linen is limited, reused, and shared among family members. Clothes absorb sweat, milk, menstrual blood, and grime. Odors accumulate, trapped in layers of rough fabric, yet life demands constant movement and labor, with little time for thorough washing. Hygiene challenges and filth. Sweat, secretions, and dirt are constant companions. Menstrual blood must be absorbed with folded rags or linen scraps. Sweat seeps into heavy wool and linen garments. Breastfeeding mothers contend with leaking milk. Skin becomes irritated, sores develop, and minor wounds risk infection. Women improvise, washing hands and face in rivers, rubbing arms with herbs, drying linen in the sun, sprinkling ashes to absorb moisture, or layering shifts to conceal stains. Hygiene is not about comfort or beauty, it is survival, dignity, and protection against social scrutiny. Stigma and social judgment. In the cramped, crowded communities of towns and villages, body odor, visible stains, and dirt invite judgment. Gossip spreads quickly, and women are often accused of negligence, laziness, or moral failing. Menstrual blood, sweat, and other secret discharges are particularly taboo, and their accidental revelation can lead to social ostracization. Managing appearance and smell is therefore essential. Each movement, each fold of linen, and each rinse in river water becomes an act of careful negotiation with the eyes of neighbors, family, and employers. Disease and malnutrition. Poverty magnifies the dangers of poor hygiene. Overcrowding, inadequate nutrition, and limited access to clean water make infections and disease rampant. Skin conditions, boils, dysentery, and respiratory illness are common. Women learn to identify and treat minor ailments with herbs, but serious disease remains a constant threat. Despite these conditions, resourcefulness thrives. Women layer rags to absorb sweat and secretions, dry them in sunlight to prevent odor, and apply herbs to soothe skin and mask smell. Survival requires ingenuity, patience, and an intimate understanding of their bodies. Resilience and ingenuity. Even in extreme poverty, lower-class women master subtle techniques of hygiene and discretion. Linen is layered strategically, herbs tucked in shifts, ash or sand sprinkled to absorb sweat, and careful folding hides stains. Movement is controlled. Sitting, bending, or walking is executed to minimize exposure of odors or dirt. Communal knowledge is passed through generations. Mothers, older sisters, and neighbors share methods for washing in rivers, layering linen, and managing secretions. These techniques are essential tools for survival,
maintaining social acceptability, and avoiding moral or supernatural judgment. Conclusion. Poverty, filth, and scarcity defined the lives of lower-class medieval women. Daily life imposed constant exposure to dirt, sweat, and secret discharges. Limited linen, cold water, and minimal resources made hygiene an ongoing challenge. Yet these hardships revealed extraordinary ingenuity, resilience, and skill. Layered linen, herbs, river washes, and strategic concealment allowed women to survive socially, physically, and morally in an unforgiving world. Their bodies, constantly producing sweat, milk, menstrual blood, and other secretions, are managed with skill born of necessity. In the midst of poverty, filth, and social pressure, these women maintain dignity and survival through relentless adaptation and creativity.